Every collection in CS2 has a boring tier, right? The supply is good, the rarity of the skins is fine, there's never really any problems with it in terms of supply and subsequently price, and oftentimes, because it exists, it's a hindrance on the long-term price of the collection. Train 2025 doesn't have one of those. From the light blues all the way up into the most unique covert we have in the armory right now, every single tier in this collection is verifiably rare. And because they share a collection, they're all connected to one another. And as I'll demonstrate in this video, that chain, that connection, is going to make this collection one of the most interesting discontinued collections we've ever seen in the game before. Welcome to the new series on the channel, Deep Dive, in which I will make a video on every collection in the game. One video, one collection. Explain the interesting things about the collection, where some skins may be undervalued, where some skins may be overvalued, interesting dynamics within each respective collection. And today we're going to start with Train 2025 because it's my favorite, baby. And it's not necessarily my favorite because of the aesthetics, but just because of how statistically and mathematically elegant the collection is, which I'll show to you in this video. The math in Train 2025 is completely unlike any other collection in the game. So let's dive deep. Now to understand just how weird the collection functions, we need to start with the catalyst. And the catalyst, of course, is the Tec-9 Whiteout. The Tec-9 Whiteout carries a float cap of 0.06 to 1. Now, if you've watched some of my videos before, you know why that matters specifically. All whiteouts carry this float cap. All whiteouts are rare, but much like the Train 2025 collection, the Tec-9 is a little bit more unique than its whiteout counterparts. And that's because most other whiteouts, or every other whiteout in the game, carries a 0.06 to 0.8 float cap, not 1. Now with a 0.06 to 0.8 float range, you're looking at a factory new percentage from a drop of around 0.6%. When your float cap is 0.06 to 1, however, your percentage chance of getting a factory new one drops to around 0.5%. Now 0.6, 0.5, doesn't really sound like too much of a difference, and it really isn't at the end of the day, but it goes to show how unique this collection is. 0.06 to 1 is mathematically the hardest float cap in which to receive a factory new drop in the game possible, right? Unless Valve changes how they do their float caps and they do 0.065 to 1, that would of course be rare, but they haven't done that ever, so I imagine 0.6 to 1 will be, and forever will be, the rarest factory new skin to get in the game. So practically, what does that mean and what does that do for the collection as a whole? Well, it means that your best way to get a factory new Tec-9 Whiteout is not to unbox one, but rather trade up to one. And as expected, that's what people are doing. One look at the CS Float database and there are 213,000 roughly Tec-9 Whiteouts in existence in all floats. So with a 0.5% drop rate, we would expect around 1,000 to be actually dropped Tec-9 Whiteouts in factory new. However, there are 3,600. So around 2,600 of those, roughly give or take, plus or minus, were traded up to and not received outright from the armory. So there's 2,500 roughly Tec-9 Whiteouts traded up to. Because the Tec-9 Whiteout in a trade up, even if you use 10 blues, has still a 1 in 3 chance because there's 3 purples within the collection, that means that there's roughly been around 7,500 trade ups done already in the year it's been out. That means that at the max, 75,000 blues were used in order to receive these Train 2025 purples. Obviously, you don't need to use 10 blues from Train 2025, but that's the best estimate we could go off of. So 75,000 blues already drained from the supply forever, never to be seen again. On top of this, we're not necessarily talking about a very popular collection. There's a reason it was removed after a year. It's because it simply was unpopular, right? And it's not like you can use just any fillers from the blues in order to get these Tec-9 Whiteouts in factory new. You need very low float ones. So as you can see over time, this does become a problem. And prices are already reflecting that fact within the blue rarity tier in Train 2025, a week after it's been announced to be discontinued, not even discontinued explicitly yet. But the market is now pricing in the supply crisis that there is in order to get the Tec-9 Whiteout. And that's only part 1. That's purple and down. We still gotta go up. And those 75,000 blues, they didn't come from anywhere, right? When the low float blue supply goes down to a point in which they're too expensive to justify even doing the trade up in the first place, where you're gonna have to look for light blues with those low floats in order to create your fillers yourself. Now, the light blues are a collection removed, so They don't suffer the same fate as a lot of the blues do. However, there will be demand for those in the future, which will ultimately drive up price, which kind of feeds into each other, right? The light blues go up because people need them, which thus makes trading up into the blues more expensive, which makes the blues more expensive, which makes the purples and pinks and reds, you get me. So the light blues are feeding the blues and the blues are feeding the purples, and the Tec-9 sits right there, dead center, as the main draining force of this collection. But it doesn't just create a problem downwards, it also creates a problem upwards. Now, upon first glance, it's not immediately obvious why, because if so many people are doing trade-ups from blues to purples, and the Tec-9 Whiteout still has a 1 in 3 chance of dropping even if you do 10 blues from Train 2025, that means that 2/3 at a minimum of your trade-ups are becoming a Zeus or a Mach 10 from Train 2025. So in theory, that would create an oversupply problem, right? And on the surface, that's correct because there's simply going to be more trade-ups done within this collection than other ones, but you do need the purples to trade up to pinks. And when you want to trade up into a pink, which fillers are you going to use? You're going to use the factory new Mach 10, you're going to use the factory new Zeus, or you're going to use the factory new Tec-9 Whiteout, which costs $700 right now. Even the minimal wear Tec-9, which has some floats available to it in which you can trade up into a factory new pink, it still doesn't work. So that oversupply issue that you have within the purples is going to be solved because the Tec-9 Whiteout exists and is a purple, which just means effectively there's one gun you can't use within that rarity tier. So there's only 2 purples realistically you can use. So that oversupply gets kind of canceled out by the fact that the Tec-9 is also in the purple tier. So since nobody's burning the whiteouts in order to use for trade-ups, the extra ones you've created for the Mach 10 and Zeus will effectively not really make too much of a difference in the grand scheme of things. And then you have the pinks, right? As we know, the M4 Hellish and the MP9 Latte Rush. Both of these, 0 to 1, right? Barring the weird float caps like the Tec-9 Whiteout has, 0 to 1 is the rarest float cap in which to receive a factory new drop, around 3%. Take the Glock Axia from Sport and Field, for example. It's 0 to 0.7, and the factory new drop rate is roughly 10%. So the Train 2025 pinks are that much harder to receive in factory new from the armory itself, which means that you're going to need to do trade-ups if you want to realistically get one of these in the future. Now, structurally, 0 to 1s are very interesting because they don't inherently have more value than any other skin, but they do because of how trade-ups are gamed in order to profit, right? If you haven't seen my video about that, I have one where I go super in depth on it, but I'll give you a brief little overview right now. 0 to 1 skins are kind of like the universal blood type, O negative, whatever the fuck it is, because it's the widest spanning float range in the game. And the rule behind profitable trade-up is that you want your inputs to have a large float range and you want your outputs to have a smaller float range. 0 to 1 is extremely useful, the most useful, because it compresses into everything. But also, it cannot benefit from that system because nothing has a bigger float range than 0 to 1, meaning that it compresses into everything and nothing compresses into it. So the trade-up system that makes them incredibly valuable also creates a system in which they cannot be produced from that system. So, the pinks in Train 2025 are hard to pull. They're hard to get from the armory explicitly. They're highly desirable fillers for reds in general, not just within the Train 2025 collection. And they're also impossible to manipulate and mass produce by the same trade-up system that needs them oh so badly. Skins.com is the newest sponsor on our channel. They have just released a P2P trading platform looking to compete with the best players in the space. If you don't want to wait that long, they do have an insta-sell feature on the site in which the rates are the best I've seen, just straight up. When the market is down, everything is on sale. And with the deals you're getting on skins.com, you could start your position basically up 20 to 25%. Try out skins.com and be a part of the future of CS2 skin trading. I will have a code soon, so stay tuned for that. And of course, we have a giveaway here for an Ursus Knife Marble Fade in Factory New. Go on my Twitter for a little bit more information there. And to trade up to the 0 to 1 pinks, you only have 2 options because the Tec-9 Whiteout's just too expensive to justifiably use. And now you can see how this is becoming a problem for the supply long term of this collection. And yet, we're not even done yet because the AWP Long Dog still exists. Now, I will say this. If the AWP Long Dog didn't look like the AWP Long Dog, this collection would have the long-term prospects of something like Norse or like St. Mark. It would be really fucking expensive. But it doesn't look not like the AWP Long Dog. It's a fucking ugly skin. So in a positive way, it gives you a bigger time frame in which to do the math and actually see this out for yourself, right? There's no aesthetic demand driving up the prices, but the math will still drive up the prices over time. Now the AWP Long Dog, 0 to 1 float cap. So the same exact thing I just talked about with the pinks, it now applies to the AWP Long Dog, right? Another 3% drop rate within the armory itself, so hard to get organically, right? You can't use minimal wear fillers to create the AWP Long Dog because there's no bigger float range than 0 to 1. Of course, it's a red, so it doesn't trade up into anything, so you don't lose supply necessarily. But the amount of trade ups happening here on top of the armory unboxings is going to be markedly less than all the ones below it because it's just so expensive. So again, another supply problem. You're gonna need factory new pinks, or at least low float minimal wear pinks, to realistically get a AWP Long Dog and factory new. And those same pinks are being used and consumed across the market because they have value themselves as trade up fillers. And those pinks are also hard to get from the armory. But luckily, because the Long Dog looks the way in which it does, the demand is sort of suppressed and probably won't ever be too large. So in a way, the price is not truly reflecting its ultimate value, its potential value, what it could be. So let's zoom out a little bit. The red is rare. To make the red, you need rare pink fillers, but those pink fillers are rare. So to make those, you need purple fillers. But one of those purple fillers is too expensive to realistically use, which puts all of the pressure on 2 other purples. And to make those purples, you need blue fillers, which aren't necessarily rare, but draining fast. And to make those blues, you need ultra, low float, light blues. The entire collection is eating at itself, demanding shit from below it to be traded up into. Because the supply is so low, there simply isn't enough to go around. The float caps, the drop rates because of the float caps, the relatively low time it remained in the armory, the way in which the trade-up mechanic works within CS is creating one of the most interesting collections we've ever seen to date. Train 2025, Train in general, has always been an experimental, weird map, right? No middle, super duper CT-sided, avant-garde in their collections, always follow the same philosophy oddly. In a future video, we'll look at Train 2021, and why that also is one of the weirdest collections we've also seen to date. That has been Deep Dive Episode 1. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. Peace.